It is our hands that let us know where our heart is. Grace and peace, everybody. Welcome to Sabbath School Study Group. This is part number 4 of our 5-part series, Faith Against All Odds. Today, we're looking at obedience, the fruit of faith. And that's interesting that word fruit would be used because you can't have fruit without a seed. And one of the beautiful things about faith, the seed of faith, is that it is best realized not in a temporal or material or monetary prosperity. It's actually realized in that word prospering in us. Remember, that was God's whole design, to reach us, to not just be with us, but by his Spirit to dwell in us. And the way that we know that God is truly in us is when we see God out of us. Another way of saying obedience. But before we go there, we want to thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Please subscribe to the channel. It takes like 2 seconds to do that, but it makes a big difference, as well as liking this video. When you like the video, other viewers can find it. It goes up to the top of that algorithm list. And by God's grace, more people come to know what we're about to see here today. So we appreciate that, and visit us online also at changeministry.org. Obedience. Obedience is reflected in action. It's not something that's just verbal. It is a decision that happens initially mentally, but it's not the end of it. It's not the final product. When we go to the books of the Bible and we read the testimony of our brothers and sisters who went before us, and we can see what they believed by how they lived. We don't really have a manifestation of what and how people believed or thought just by what they said. The stories always end up in action, whether it's obedience or whether it's a disobedience. Both reveal the state of the heart. And it's why when we go to Romans chapter 3, when Paul is speaking to the church at Rome, he says, "Is he the God of the Jews only? Is he not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Seeing it is one God," as we are trying to understand, "which shall justify," because he's the justifier, "the circumcision by faith, and he justifies the uncircumcision through faith. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we actually establish the law." So we see a difference of circumstance between the circumcision and the uncircumcision. He's talking about the Jews versus the Gentiles. That's a distinction that we see, but God's looking beyond that and through that and looking at the heart. He's looking at where is their faith. And if our faith is in him, regardless of Jew or Gentile, we're going to establish the law. We will walk in his will. We will actually establish the truth of the law by where our faith is. And we will know where or in who our faith is by what we do. Over here in Romans chapter 6, we establish the law, but in this verse it says, "What then? Shall we sin?" In other words, do we disobey because we're not under the law? Meaning, but under grace? God forbid. "Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death, or of obedience unto righteousness." There it is. "But God be thanked that you were the servants of sin, but ye have obeyed from the heart." Slow down. "But you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered unto you." He's actually giving a high five here to the brothers and sisters at Rome, saying that you've obeyed from the heart. So what was in your heart didn't just stay there. It wasn't just in my heart. Oh, God knows my heart. He sees my heart. That's all true. But what was in our heart and what was in their heart comes out in what we do. Not only that, but we have to be mindful when we read there when he says, "But you are not under the law." We can misinterpret that to mean that we are no longer under the obligation of the law. Clearly, God did not take us out of the obligation of the law. Again, why would Jesus die? Why would he give us Jesus? He is keeping the law by giving us Christ. Christ was keeping the law by dying for us. It's telling us then that we are no longer under the condemnation of the law. The law has no penalty on a believer anymore. We're no longer under the punishment, which is eternal death. Down in Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Love this chapter. And this book is probably my favorite book in the Bible. This is one of my favorite chapters next to chapter 5. But here in Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 3 says, there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus. There it is. We are not under the condemnation if we are in Christ. Because guess what? Those who are in Christ, we walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. There it is again. The secret to our success is God's power in us by his Spirit. Because the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, what does it do? It has made me free from the law of sin and death. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh. Praise. The verse started saying, there is therefore now no condemnation. Are we seeing the heart and the mind of God? I should say, are we seeing the heart and the mind of God? He is not trying to condemn us. Jesus condemned sin on the cross. Not even the people who were up on the crosses with him. He says, if you believe in me, there's no condemnation. That's why we have the visual representation of this when he was on the cross. When one person rejected him and he came under the condemnation of the cross, but then one brother believed in him. And what did Jesus say? You will die this death, this temporal death. You'll go to sleep, but the death, the final death from which there is no resurrection, because that's the ultimate price that you have to pay for sin, you're going to be free from that. When I come back, you're going to wake up with me. I will raise you up. This is Jesus getting us to see what Paul now is trying to say. Jesus lived it, and now Paul, like us, we can only preach it and practice it. And the practice of the promise is that when we are in Christ, we don't walk in the flesh. We're still in the flesh, just like he was in the flesh, but he never yielded to it, so that we could have a witness that we don't have to make that decision either. That's what Romans 6 was just talking about, which we just read. We are servants to someone, whether we're servants to God or we're servants to the flesh. If we're servants to God, we will serve him. We will follow him. We will trust him. And if you've tried to do it on your own and failed, here's the good news of that. Now you know you can't do it on your own. It's not by might. It's not by power, but it's by God's Spirit in us. We can have the Spirit of God to reflect the life of Christ if we would just believe, even believing enough to obey him.